Intel has certainly shown that you can offer 16 gigabytes of VRAM for well under $400. However, is it actually better? VRAM isn't everything. Well, in Unreal Engine 5 at 4K Epic settings RT on, so completely maxed out, it certainly matters. Not that that's how you would actually use these GPUs. You can see the 4060 Ti stuttering down to 1 frame per second. It's an actual slideshow. The Arc A770 is leading in the 1% lows by a factor of 14 times the performance, which is a lot, and 31% in the averages. However, that factor of 14 is a difference between 14 and 1. So in other words, it's not really that usable of an experience on the Arc A770 anyway. So what? If we turn down settings, and we even stay at 4K resolution, but we just go down to the high settings, no hardware ray tracing, we now see the 4060 Ti winning by 37% on average, and even 40% in the 1% lows. And neither GPU is doing an amazing job here, but the 4060 Ti is at least in the upper 30s on average, whereas the Arc A770 is still averaging below 30 frames per second. So, in other words, yes, VRAM absolutely can matter, and we'll look at some more games and all that, but it's certainly not the only factor to consider when buying a graphics card. Now, dropping down to more realistic settings you might be thinking about, in other words, at least resolution, 1440p. Let's look at, can these games max out 1440p in Unreal Engine 5? Epic settings, hardware ray tracing on, we're seeing a 50% lead for the 4060 Ti and a 46% lead in the 1% lows. The 4060 Ti isn't exactly delivering a higher refresh rate experience here. It's only down around 42 frames per second. But the Arc A770 is actually still averaging below 30 frames per second at these settings. So I think honestly both GPUs would probably want to turn settings down. So if we do that, we go down to the high preset. So this keeps Lumen, it keeps Nanite, keeps virtual shadow maps, just turns them down a notch on and a lot of other settings. Still looks very good. We're now seeing the 4060 Ti averaging in the upper 60s, with the A770 averaging in the lower 40s. This is a 58% lead for the 4060 Ti and a 50% lead in the 1% lows. So the again, we're not really constrained by VRAM at this point. It's just that the 4060 Ti is faster in this game as it is. Now, what if we drop down to 1080p, which is where the 4060 Ti is marketed, although it's still priced high at $400. We're seeing at maximum settings, so epic settings with ray tracing on, we are seeing the 4060 Ti winning by 63%. So overall, you know, the 4060 Ti is definitely winning here, and we're seeing the A770 below 40 FPS average maxed out at 1080p in Unreal Engine 5. Now, I don't know if Fortnite will be representative of every Unreal Engine 5 game, but it's the main one that we have right now to actually test. If we do drop the settings down to the high preset rather than the Epic with RT preset, we're now seeing the Arc A770 at least getting closer to 60 frames per second, but the 4060 Ti at these same settings is actually closing in on 100 frames per second, and it's a 77% lead for the 4060 Ti in both the averages and the 1% lows. Now, this is not going to always be this exact same performance delta in every game and engine. Art can be kind of all over the place. So let's switch over to an Unreal Engine 4 game that's also a PlayStation 5 exclusive on consoles that has been ported over to PC. So we're looking at Returnal. This is at 1080p Epic settings. The game does feature ray tracing, but I did not enable it. The Epic preset does not have ray tracing enabled. And here we're seeing the 4060 Ti leading by 28% and only 4% in the 1% lows. Both GPUs doing well, the Arc A770 in the mid-70s and the 4060 Ti getting close to 100 frames per second. If we go up to 1440p at the Epic preset, we now see the lead for the 4060 Ti dropping, although it is still leading. It's up by 20% on average, and actually in the 1% lows, it's up by 15% now. And the Arc A770 is averaging around 60 frames per second at 1440p epic, and the 4060 Ti is getting a little bit over 70 frames per second. So we're seeing very different results than we saw in Unreal Engine 5 with Fortnite. Now going to 4K epic settings, the 4060 Ti's lead drops even further, although it still does maintain a lead. It's winning by 11% on average and 8% in the 1% lows, although neither GPU should really play this game at these settings. It's playable, but you'd rather either use some upscaling or turn down settings or resolution or both. Now, let's take a look at one of the latest major releases with Star Wars Jedi Survivor. This is on the latest patch as of filming. I think it's patch 5 or something like that. And at 1080p maxed out settings, so epic preset with ray tracing turned on. And this is another Unreal Engine 4 game, like Returnal was. We're now seeing the 4060 Ti winning by 62% on average and 89% in the 1% lows. 4060 Ti is averaging over 70 frames per second, with the A770 just down in the mid-40s. So not an amazing showing for the A770 here. But if we drop down to the high settings and turn ray tracing off, at least the A770 is averaging around 60 frames per second now, but the 4060 Ti is closing in on 100 frames per second. This is giving the 4060 Ti a 42% lead on the averages and a 74% lead in the 1% lows. The Arc A770 is reporting a lot of VRAM allocation and usage, but whether or not that's playing into the numbers, the 4060 Ti is just faster here, even in the 1% lows, smoother frame time graph. But what if we kick up the resolution? Well, if we go to 1440p epic settings with ray tracing on, so once again, completely maxed out 1440p, we're seeing the 4060 Ti winning by 50% on the averages and 73% in the 1% lows. The 4060 Ti is not exactly crushing it here. It's only in the upper 40s, around 50 FPS or so. And the Arc A770 is actually down closer to 30 frames per second, with its 1% lows dipping down into the low 20s. So it's certainly a smoother experience on the 4060 Ti here, despite the A770 reporting a large amount of VRAM allocation and usage. What if we turn off ray tracing and go down to the high settings though? Well, now we're seeing the 4060 Ti still ahead, but only by 28%, although the 1% lows are still a 65% lead for the NVIDIA GPU. At these settings, the 4060 Ti is averaging a little over 60 frames per second, so this is probably how you'd want to play the game if you were doing it on a 4060 Ti at 1440p. Whereas on the A770, you're still averaging below 60. You're actually below a little, right around 50 frames per second here. So certainly completely playable. I mean, consoles are 30 FPS in this game, right? Do they go up to 60 here? Anyway, what if we go up to 4K resolution with epic settings, with ray tracing on, just really crank a bunch of VRAM heavy resolution and settings? Well, despite all of that, the 4060 Ti is still winning by 39% and 58% in the 1% lows. Neither GPU is really winning, though. I would call this a Pyrrhic victory because the 4060 Ti is only around 25 frames per second, and the A770 is around 18 frames per second. So this is not how either GPU would want to play the game. And so what if we dropped it down to high settings? Well, at high settings, the 4060 Ti is closer to 30 frames per second, which isn't amazing, but I mean, maybe you could consider a 30 FPS lock at 4K. Realistically, I just don't think it's a 4K GPU, but hey, we'll test it out. Now the 4060 Ti, when we drop down to the high settings, turn ray tracing off, is only winning by 19%, but it is still winning. It's winning by 37% in the 1% lows. The Arc A770 is still not able to give us a 30 frames per second experience here. So it seems like, despite this game being, pretty VRAM hungry, it's not making up enough of a difference for the A770 to pull ahead. Now, the 4060 Ti in a Plague Tale Requiem at 1080p Ultra is winning by 27% on average and 72% in the 1% lows. And look at the weird frame time graph on the A770. It has a whole bunch of little spikes that the 4060 Ti just doesn't. And I think that's contributing to the very large difference in the 1% lows. And so you would get a very much smoother experience in this game on the NVIDIA GPU. Also, if we go up to 1440p Ultra settings, at native resolution, the 4060 Ti has a 17% lead. And 23% in the 1% lows. But not only that, this game does feature DLSS. It doesn't feature XeSS or FSR, so none of the upscaling technologies that the Arc A770 could use. Now, so I'm not using it in my averages, but I thought I'd just show you that using DLSS quality, you can get up to almost 100 frames per second average here. And if you add in frame gen on top of that, you can go up over 120. Whereas at native 1440p, the 4060 Ti is sitting around 55, 54, and the A770 down around 47. So this is one of those games where, DLSS is in more games than XeSS is. And when it is, and you want to use it, then that's an advantage. Plague Tale Requiem at 4K resolution at ultra settings. We're now seeing the 4060 Ti breaking 30 FPS at least, and the A770 isn't. It's a 24% lead for the 4060 Ti on the averages, and a 30% lead in the 1% lows. But again, this is probably not how I'd play the game anyway. How about another PS5 exclusive? Now, unlike Returnal, this one uses a lot of VRAM. At 1080p ultra-high preset, which includes ray tracing, though, we do still see the 4060 Ti ahead by 32%. It's 63 FPS-ish versus about 45 FPS. If we jump up to 1440p ultra-high preset, which again includes ray tracing, now the lead on the 4060 Ti is dropping to 11%, but it is still a lead. I can't give a 1% lows measurement here because this benchmark run goes through several load screens which mess with the 1% lows. So, too bad. Now, I don't think we'd really want to push either of these GPUs to 4K at these settings, but here we did finally see the VRAM and resolution take its toll on the 4060 Ti, and the A770 did pull ahead by 24%. But it's not a meaningful win because it's, well, the frame rates, guys. It's 21 versus 17. Now, in The Last of Us Part 1, I was hoping to demonstrate a new AAA VRAM-hungry game and the performance difference. But what I got instead was that the 4060 Ti can get you over 60 FPS at 1080p Ultra, and the Arc A770 would just repeatedly crash every time I tried to open the game and build the shaders. It would make a few percent progress before crashing, so maybe I could have eventually built the shaders if I had had an infinite amount of time. However, I didn't. So let's move on to another game. Resident Evil 4 Remake at its maximum preset at 1080p, which does include ray tracing. The 4060 Ti is winning by 38% in both the averages and the 1% lows, despite this being so VRAM heavy that at launch these settings would actually crash on an 8GB GPU. The game has been patched since then and no longer crashes. Now, if we go up to, if we actually turn down to prioritize graphics, which turns the ray tracing off along with a few other settings reductions, we now see both GPUs giving a high refresh rate experience. The A770 is almost at 100 FPS, but the 4060 Ti is up over 140 FPS, giving it a 37% lead overall by the end of the run, and an 84% lead in the 1% lows, which is pretty massive. Now, if we go up to 1440p at the maximum setting, which again includes ray tracing, here's where I think the VRAM is starting to make a bigger difference. You can see the 4060 Ti stuttering, its 1% lows dropping, giving the Arc A770 an over 3 times advantage in its 1% lows. And the average FPS is basically a tie, because when the 4060 Ti isn't stuttering, it is running faster, but it stutters enough to bring down its averages and make the overall experience pretty bad. Now, at 1440p prioritize graphics preset, which doesn't have ray tracing and uses a lot less VRAM, we're now seeing both GPUs giving a respectable experience, but the 4060 Ti is winning by 22% on average and 55% in the 1% lows. 4060 Ti is over 90 FPS, and the A770 is in the mid-70s, so completely usable, but definitely not as fast. Now, Resident Evil 4 4K maximum preset, we are again seeing the GPUs kind of brought down to a tie by these settings. On the averages, although in the 1% lows, we're over 2 times better on the Arc A770. And again, the averages are weird where the 4060 Ti can be faster when it's not stuttering, but when it is stuttering, anyway. So that's kind of what we get there. If we go down to the prioritize graphics preset at 4K resolution, the 4060 Ti takes a modest lead at 9%, and now has a lead in the 1% lows at 27%. So it is offering the better experience here. Now, overall, honestly, the ray tracing in this game really isn't worth it anyway. It's just reflections and they're very noisy. So I turned them off even on my 4090 just because I found them distracting. Now, moving to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. At the 1080p balanced preset, so I'm not using the maximums here, we're down at the balanced preset since it's a competitive game. We're seeing the 4060 Ti absolutely crushing the A770 with an 80% lead on average and over doubling in the 1% lows. So this one's not even close, although the A770 is certainly still playable at almost 100 FPS average and around 60 in the 1% lows. Now if we go up to 1440p balanced, I'm now seeing a 52% lead in the averages and a 55% lead in the 1% lows. So the A770 does close some of the gap at 1440p, but it just started far enough behind that that's just not doing a lot for it here overall. Although, again, still completely playable on this A770, the 4060 Ti is offering a much better experience. And if we kick it up to 4K resolution, we once again see the 4060 Ti's lead dropping, but it started out with such an advantage that it's still ahead by 28% on average and 37% in the 1% lows, despite not really being as well super well suited to 4K given its memory bus and 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Again, at the balanced preset, we're not using that much VRAM anyway. What about heavy ray tracing workloads? Well, in Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p ray tracing ultra preset, we have the 4060 Ti winning by 38% on average and 31% in the 1% lows. And those numbers are given without factoring in frame generation. But this is the second game in my benchmark suite here that does feature frame generation, which I'm showing you on the far right. However, at these settings, I would not enable it. Yes, it gives you over 60 frames per second, actually over 70 frames per second here. But if you look down at the bottom of the screen, I'm showing the NVIDIA performance overlay, and you can see the average PC latency. I've found that around 50 milliseconds is kind of my tipping point between I'd rather turn things down or just turn off frame gen and just not use it. This is getting closer to that 60 millisecond line. It just feels not responsive enough for me to want to use. So despite it making the smoothness of the image go over 70 frames per second, the responsiveness just isn't where I would want it to be. Now, what if we use some upscaling? Cyberpunk does feature Intel's XeSS upscaling. So we'll use it here at the quality setting, and we'll use DLSS at the quality setting. And the average and relative performance numbers here are given based off of those without factoring in frame generation. So even without frame generation factored in, the 4060 Ti is winning by 59% here and 49% in the 1% lows. It's actually getting over 70 frames per second now. Now, I don't really like having to upscale at 1080p, but it's usable, I think, for a lot of people, and it does get you the heavy ray tracing experience. You could also use frame generation now, and now that our base frame rate is higher, I think frame generation both looks better and feels better than it did at the lower base frame rate. And so here I actually think if I was going to use ray tracing in this game, I would probably use it with what we're seeing on the far right, the DLSS quality plus frame generation. So it's a neat option to have. Now, what if we kick on path tracing? So if we do the new RT Overdrive mode, which, like I said, is path tracing, the 4060 Ti is not doing very well. It's around 19 FPS at this point in the benchmark, and it doesn't ever really do much better than that. Whereas the A770 is down at like 6 frames per second. So it's over 3.5 times faster on average and 4 times faster than the 1% lows on the 4060 Ti. Now, what if we allow some upscaling? If we do it at the quality setting, and again, using XeSS and DLSS respectively, we see the A770 only around 12 frames per second. The 4060 Ti is at least over 30 frames per second, and you might at least be able to use this to play around with path tracing a bit. Probably not the way I'd want to actually play the game, though, at this low of a frame rate, when you can get so much higher frame rates with other settings. If we use more aggressive upscaling, going all the way to the performance setting, which is extremely aggressive, we're still seeing the A770 unable to break 20 frames per second, whereas the 4060 Ti is now just shy of a 60 frames per second average, making it not quite, but almost 3 times faster. And the real issue here, though, is I wouldn't use this setting because I think the performance upscaling is just way too damaging to the image quality to make it worthwhile. Now, what if we just played Cyberpunk 2077 without ray tracing enabled? What happens then? Well, now the Arc A770 is closer than we've seen in a lot of games. The 4060 Ti is winning by 20% on the averages and 18% in the 1% lows. The 4060 Ti is getting almost 100 frames per second, and the A770 is over 80 frames per second, so both of them giving you a good experience here. And this game seems to, Arc seems to perform better here than it did in many of the other games that we've tested. Now, how about 1440p at the Ultra preset? Again, no ray tracing enabled. Well, at these settings, the Arc A770 is almost matching the 4060 Ti. It's just a little under 60 frames per second, whereas the 4060 Ti is a little over 60 frames per second, giving the 4060 Ti a 9% lead on average and in the 1% lows. So overall, you are still getting a little bit better experience on the 4060 Ti, but this is one of the better showings for the Arc A770. Now, if we go up to the 4K Ultra resolution, the 4060 Ti doesn't scale as well here. We're now seeing a 20% lead for the Arc A770 on the averages, and also a lead on the 1% lows. However, overall, it's really only about a 30 FPS experience with 1% lows below that on the A770, and the 4060 Ti is down around 25 frames per second. So these just really aren't realistic settings that I think you'd want to be using on these GPUs, so I'm not sure how meaningful this victory is. Well, in the vast majority of the benchmarks, the A770 lost. However, that should be expected. It does cost less, and we do need to keep that in mind when wrapping up all of this analysis. Now, in this video, I was testing out the Acer Predator Bifrost version of the 16GB card, because when I bought it, this one was on sale and was the cheapest one available. However, as of right now, I'm looking at PC Part Picker, sorting prices low to high. It's looking like it's no longer the cheapest model available. Looks like it's around $360, and Intel's own limited edition model is down to $350. Don't get fooled by the 8GB version up here at $330. So it's looking like right now, not the most amazing pricing we have seen on A770s, but in general, the RTX 4060 Ti is, well, first of all, I need to put a 0 there. Second of all, it is widely available at its MSRP of $400. Now, so overall, on the actual market, the price difference here is 400 divided by 350. You do save some money going with the Intel GPU, and you do get double the VRAM. But is it worth it to make that choice? I don't think so. Did we see some instances where having the 16 gigabytes of VRAM was an advantage, and did give it a performance lead over the more expensive NVIDIA GPU? Yes, that certainly did happen. But the vast majority of places where that happened, we were using settings and resolutions that were honestly unrealistic for both GPUs. So, do I like that Intel is competing in the graphics card market? Yes. Do I like that they're offering 16 gigabytes of VRAM for well under $400, showing that that certainly seems like it's something that companies could afford to do? Yes. Do I think you should buy the Arc A770? No. But does that mean I think you should buy the 4060 Ti? No. Okay. So the real elephant in the room here is, well, a comparison I've already made, which is the 6700 XT from AMD. So at current pricing in the new market, you can buy a 6700 XT brand new for $320. Does that rely on a mail-in rebate? It usually lists it here if it does. So no, it looks like $320 for a brand new RX 6700 XT from AMD. Now, it doesn't have as much VRAM as the Arc A770. It has 12 gigabytes rather than 16, but both of those are significantly more than the 8 gigabytes of VRAM that you get on the 4060 Ti. This also costs significantly less money than the 4060 Ti, so it has more VRAM, costs less money, and the performance is overall very similar when you're not taking into account a lot of the newer generation features like AV1 encoding. But anyway, the point is that this is, anyway, if you're going to go, how should I put this? If you're going to go with a non-NVIDIA GPU that costs less than the 4060 Ti and offers more VRAM, I just think in my testing, the Arc A770 just didn't prove to be the one you should get. Its performance seemed to be all over the place. In certain games, it was, like in Cyberpunk, without using ray tracing, it was very close in performance to the 4060 Ti. But the 6700 XT, I've already got a video detailed comparison against the 6700 XT versus the 4060 Ti. And you should probably go ahead and watch that one instead if you're looking for the budget alternative to the 4060 Ti. I think what would have been really nice is if the 4060 Ti came in either at $100 or $100 less, or it offered 16 gigabytes of VRAM at this price. Or, even $50 less if it's going with the 8 gigabytes. But honestly, it just shouldn't have gone with the 8 gigabytes. Now, some people might be like, why not offer 12? A 4060 Ti, so how should I put that? Not just the 4060 Ti, but GPUs have a certain memory bus, and you need a certain amount of bits to connect to a memory module, namely 32. So a 128-bit bus can fit 4 memory modules, so depending on how many gigabytes is on each module, you can get 4 or 8, and then you can go into clamshell mode where you double that by sticking more onto the back, which gives you the further option of going up to 16. So really 12 just wasn't on the table unless they just designed a different GPU. But anyway, so yeah, I thought this was an interesting comparison, but I don't think the 16 gigabytes of VRAM makes up for the large performance difference that you get overall. And I don't think the inconsistency of the A770 makes sense against the 6700 XT, although I haven't done a direct head-to-head comparison video between the two, so maybe that's something I should be doing in the near future. Would that be something you guys would like to see? 6700 XT versus A770. I've already ran all the benchmarks, just need to put those ones side by side. Let me know what you guys are interested in seeing me test out further on the channel. And I hope all of you guys have an excellent day, and huge thank you to channel subscribers and members and all of that.